Welcome to Subscription Prescription, the podcast where you get the information you need to scale your subscription program. Hello and welcome to another dose of Subscription Prescription, the podcast where we try to help you understand how to scale your e-commerce business with subscriptions. I'm very excited today to be joined by Vijay Menon, the founder and CEO of Butter Payments. Vijay, thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Lovely to be here. And for those that are wondering at home why we call ourselves Butter, Butter is where churn ends. But obviously, Matt is going to have us talk a little bit about the type of churn we solve, which might not be what is on the top of everyone's minds.
No, absolutely. And I do love the name. When I first came across it, I just thought that is clever, and clever in a very Silicon Valley way, where everybody's just misspelling a word or dropping an E out of something to make it sound clever. So I do like butter, and that's where the money happens, right? That is butter. So Vijay, you have a really interesting background. One of the reasons I was excited to interview you is that you've worked at some pretty large organizations on retention, like Xbox Live and DropBox. I would love to hear a little bit more from your perspective, and also to introduce you a little bit more into our audience, a little bit about your background and some of the places you've worked and what you've done.
Absolutely. So, I'll take a step back, and I imagine, Matt, you probably have a similar story, but I certainly didn't grow up thinking I would become one of the world's leaders in solving and remediating failed payments. So the journey really starts with a couple of core interests growing up. Those would be sports and video games. And on the sports side, really was deep into basketball and wanted to prove to my dad that Kobe was better than Shaq, and spent a lot of time getting deep into NBA analytics. And that led me down sabermetrics, and that led me down a path of studying statistics and really trying to understand the story and the data. And actually then led me towards my first job, which was over at Microsoft a decade ago on the Xbox team. That's where I married that passion for video games,
right?
Particularly Halo was one of my games growing up, and was able to kind of land at the intersection of two of the things that I love the most. And it's over at Xbox where I first started to get acquainted with the problem of failed payments, and started to realize that it's an actionable problem. It's actually not a silent problem that you can do nothing about, but that actually subscription companies can start to fix it. So happy to dive into some of those details, but that's really where I got my start in this world. And over the course of a decade, learned what I learned at Xbox, then learned some more at DropBox, learned some more at Scribd, and then eventually started Butter to solve payment failure for all different B2C subscription businesses.
Absolutely. And we are going to dive, for anyone listening, we are going to dive deeper into Butter and how that works. That is actually one of the focus for this program. But like Vijay, like having you on here, I'm curious, what are some of the issues related to retention that, Xbox and was running into? Is it like, can you paint us a little bit of a picture of some of the ins and outs of what that kind of program looks like? Obviously it's pretty massive, but definitely want to find something that people listening at home can relate to.
Totally. I mean, the first thing I would say is, in particular, if you think back to 2013, 2014, how organizations approached retention was almost exclusively through a lens of active churn reduction. What I mean by that is, what are the attributes associated with your users that make them stickier? And if you think about that in the context of Xbox Live or video games, well, the attributes that I first started exploring were engagement metrics. So how many hours are people playing games? How many friends are they adding? How many times are they revisiting the platform? And you would imagine, of course, that as these metrics move up and you have your weekly engagement metrics reviews, that the more up and to the right you have engagement on the platform, whether that's Xbox or any other platform, the less you would have a risk of churn. And of course, that is true to some extent for the active churn portion of the business. But there's this stubborn portion of the business that you can call passive churn or billing churn or payment failure, or involuntary or accidental churn, which is what we call it. That doesn't matter how engaged you are on the platform. If Microsoft or Xbox can't collect payment from you, they will churn you from the platform. You might not think this is a big issue, right? But if I sign up for Xbox Live today and it's January 17th, and we're going to go bill users for a monthly subscription, well, we're going to run a billing queue on February 17th. There's going to be an engineer sitting in Redmond, Washington. That's going to go run those payments for all those users who signed up today on January 17th, right? And they're going to run it between 12 and 2 local time. And that's Pacific time in Redmond, Washington, Seattle, Washington.
Right.
But Matt, what if I signed up for the platform from India, for example? Well, if I signed up for the platform from India, I'm still getting rolled into that billing queue. I'm still getting billed at 12 Pacific. But the difference is it looks like that card's being run at 2:30 in the morning because my local time is not 12:30 Seattle.
Right.
It's 2:30 in Bombay. And so that card's getting run at 2:30 in the morning. And it almost looks like Matt's at a gas station in Botswana in the middle of the night swiping a card. And that's what's happening at the subscription level. But now you're Microsoft, and now you're millions of users across the world. They're all getting run through that queue. No one in the organization thinks that this is a thing they should care about. And, can't blame them, right? We're not thinking about that. We're thinking about making Xbox Live a better platform.
But and what's happening to users? What's happening to users when that happens? So I'm just thinking about for myself, like if I was subscribed to Xbox Live and I signed up and then found out that my credit card had failed or whatever, like how many people would overcome that versus those who just get frustrated because the platform's stupid? That's what I say, and I'm a grown man, and then move on to something else.
Totally. And, as stupid as you might think that platform is, 99% of the industry and subscriptions is running exactly that way today.
Right.
Exactly what we're doing. And I'm using a reductive example, but let's just go into that example. That's pretty normal. And what's going to end up happening is two things on the company side, right? On the subscription company side, which can be Xbox Live, but it can be even your basic, e-commerce subscription business. On the company side, what am I seeing? I'm seeing a payment failure response from Adyen or Stripe or Braintree or any other payment service provider or PSP. And so when I receive that response, fraud, for instance, I basically think there's nothing I can do, right? I think the user needs to go to the bank, call the bank, and do something to fix it. And I trust that Stripe, Adyen, Braintree, or the like has given me that error response because there's literally nothing I can do.
Yeah, they have their own dunning processes. We're trusting that they're going to try to recover that payment as best as they know how. Right.
Totally. And if you think about the dynamics, a lot of people ask, well, why the PSP solved it? Well, the dynamics are different because a lot of PSPs, they're charging per swipe as well, right? So it doesn't need to be recovered in one swipe. It can be recovered in 10 swipes. I get paid on the 10 swipes. I don't get paid on the first. So the efficiency doesn't necessarily matter. So I'm the company. I received the failed payment response. I think I can't do anything, even though in reality, maybe I could just charge 5 hours later to be very functional about it. Now, if I'm the user, what ends up happening? Well, I go to play Xbox that night. I try to sign up. I jump onto a Halo lobby. I can't get on it because Xbox has removed access. And the Xbox person isn't malintentioned. They're just like, well, this payment is past due. Right. Therefore, I remove access. And so now I'm confused. I'm like, I know that I put my card down. I didn't choose to churn, but I'm being churned from the platform. And so there's confusion that occurs. Now, your follow-up question might be like, what percentage of users might end up going through the process, working through it, trying to resolve it? In general, we've never seen that number be above 30%. It doesn't matter what your business is. Holistically, if you have been churned from a service, and you can imagine your own reaction to it. Imagine that you've done nothing wrong. You put a card down. The service just stopped working. You'd be pissed. Right. You might look for an alternative service. You might try and take the call to the bank, and the bank might not know what to do, and you might literally not have an opportunity to update it, or you might be so annoyed that you never do. And so of that base of those who churn, never more than 30% end up going back onto your service. And you've created a huge trust issue. You've created a service issue. And the worst part is most of the time you didn't even know.
Yeah, you have no idea.
And so much at scale that you can't even know.
And what I think is interesting too for anyone who's like following along with this is the idea with something like Xbox or playing video games is something that a lot of us we're doing fairly regularly. And so you might notice that something's wrong probably earlier on. But if you're selling a supplement specifically to like somebody who's fairly new, maybe they're new to the product, new to the program, maybe they're 3 months in, a lot of customers forget. And so if it doesn't show up for 2 months, they don't think about it. They don't really realize it's happening. And by the time maybe they do think about it and they go find out that they've been canceled, that's fine with them. They're going to go buy it off Amazon or go get it somewhere else, right? That's happening all of the time on the e-com side of things.
1,000%. And so, you're calling out the consumer side. And on the business side, this problem, you might ask, like, where does it strike, right? And it strikes across really core three businesses, right? Because you've got your digital subscription company, right? Your Xboxes, your Netflixes, your Spotifys, they all deal with it. But it's a digital good, so there's some time to remediate the error. To your point, there are box businesses, right? They're shipping nutrients, they're shipping food, they're shipping perishables, they're shipping baby goods, they're shipping vitamins, or they're shipping ED pills, right? Doesn't matter what you're shipping something. And the problem's even more salient now because I don't have 30 days to go recover a failed payment when I'm a direct to consumer box business. I might have 48 hours, right? If I am shipping you a weekly meal kit, if I run the payment on Wednesday, you got to get the box by Friday. So we only have 24 hours, 48 hours to go fix that payment failure. It's even more salient. And then to your point, if I don't get the box, first of all, I might not notice it. And second of all, it's way more salient for me. Like a box did not appear. So that's a big issue for those businesses to solve. It can be solved similarly. And I guess the last area is even in the B2B world, right? And you mentioned Dropbox, the B2B world. Well, this is salient too because there's enterprise licenses. There's folks that have sales motions through self-serve. And if you have a self-serve sales motion, people are putting cards down. And if those cards fail, people get booted from the platform. And I just ran through this actually, right? Because my business is signed up for, 1Password and other different types of services like Zoom. We just got a new Brex card. Nobody had auto updater set up. So all my payments failed. All our licenses went down and I couldn't use these services, right? And so this is a major pain point, even outside of revenue perspective. It's just a huge pain point for a customer. And it's kind of rare to get these businesses where it's like, you can solve it, make a business impact. And I like to say our business, rising tide lifts all boats, because the customer gets the product, they're happier. The business gets the money, they're happier. The PSPs get more transaction volume. Everyone's happier in this instance. And so let's solve this problem, right? That people are really not looking as deeply into as they frankly should be.
Okay, so let's dive into that problem a little bit more. So, because I had some questions about this as well as from other people. Like, so you use the example of like charging the card in Seattle local time, and maybe the consumers in India or in a different time zone. Can you elaborate more on the problem? Not so much the solution just yet, but what is happening so that we can understand better of like how our payment process. Because I know from a supplement side, like supplements in general are fairly viewed as risky. And so it's often seen like if a payment's failing, it's that payment gateway or processors decided that they don't like that anymore because they don't like selling this type of thing. What other reasons or problems is this happening or being caused by on the payment side?
Yeah, great question. And happy to get as low level as you want with this. So feel free to interject and ask questions as we run through it. So one frame of thinking about this is to think about our stack as kind of, or this problem generally, as the inverse of what fraud companies do. So you think about what fraud companies do today is they come up front at the top or the point of sale, and they develop algorithms or systems to detect when they think a fraudster or a card tester is coming through your platform. And they will then go and make sure those payments don't get created or those transactions don't get pushed through, because they want to minimize your likelihood of getting a chargeback or a refund down the line from a malicious actor. What we're actually saying is that in this problem case, it's the inverse of that. And the inverse of that is that you actually have this big subset of legitimate users, the Matts, the Vijay's of the world, that actually want to pay for a service. But when they go to put their card down, that payment gets rejected. And when that payment gets rejected, they can't access the service. And so what we're saying is there's this big actual base of failed payments that is composed of users who are legitimate. They have a legitimate payment method. They are trying to give you their money, and they cannot because of how your payment gateways are set up, because of what payment methods you provide on your platform. And that's what we want to fix. So if I want to think about framing that problem for you, what I would think about...
So some of that, if I'm hearing you correctly, just a little reflective listening, is the way they're setting up their fraud detection algorithms, that subscriptions or repeat payments, how those are being processed is often being flagged or triggered by those systems. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we often get real legitimate payments that should be going through, that if you were to go take it down to the endpoint of who's actually trying to present that card, you'd find a real person that literally wants your product. But it's being returned as false. It's being told that it's fraud or any other number of reasons. And because of
And
that,
why aren't they seeing that it's like, like the third or fourth, like, because this is not just happening on the first renewal, right? This is happening on third, fourth, fifth, 10th renewals. Like, why
yes,
is it happening
and
after so many successful charges
it's
have
a
gone
great
through?
question. And in fact, even in our business, we actually come downstream. So the failed payments that we're recovering literally had to have been accepted at some point in the past.
Right. Right.
So they had to have been validated at some point. And yet you ask the question, why downstream are there payment failure issues happening? Well, to your point, even the base that we address, we know they've been validated at some point. Just because they're validated doesn't mean that it's 100% that it's legitimate, but it gives
Sure.
you the signal that it is, right? And so let's get super high level with two reasons why these payments end up failing. We talked about one reductive example up front, which is timing. That's only about 5% of actually the reasons why payments fail. If I give you two high level attributes that people should be looking into, it's timing and it's metadata. Timing, insofar as we talked about the India example, but we work with a lot of businesses that are US only, the timing still matters. You're like, why? Well, the timing matter is not just down to, what day you're running a payment, but you can think about reasons why that would matter, right? Super simple frameworks. Like, it's a debit card, people get paid on the 15th, you would run that card on the 16th, you would imagine to have a higher likelihood of success. Great, that's super simple stuff. But even just down to the cadence at which you run payments, that matters. Are we batching them? Are we spreading them over time? Are we making the distribution look normalized? Those matter. And we've actually found literally down to the minute matters. I'm going to explain why in a second, but literally down to the minute. Like, if I run a payment at 127, the likelihood that it goes through is higher than if I run it at 141. That might sound absolutely nuts to you. I promise you it's true. So I'll get back to that in a second, like why that is, but the timing matters all the way to that degree, not just this generic 12 o'clock local time case. So that's an easy way to get a quick win. And then the other area is the metadata itself. And when I say that, you might be, what do you mean? It's a payment. And that's what 99% of organizations do, is they submit payments the same way. But when you submit a payment, there's up to 128 different fields you can pass with that payment.
Right.
I can make those simple, right? One of them is a zip code. That's one of the 128 different fields. It can also tell you a lot of businesses never capture a zip code. Why don't they capture a zip code? Because there's a product manager that says, I want to reduce friction. I want to run an experiment where more people check out. So they get rid of the zip code field. They measure the results of the experiment. They see there's a 5% increase in people clicking submit. They celebrate. They conclude that less friction means more submissions, which means more money. What they don't check is that after that 5% more submissions, 15% more users did not clear the authorization, because nobody tracks that authorization metric. And because they don't track the authorization metric, the organization celebrates a win that wasn't a win. You lose money, and that 15% of users doesn't go through. But it's not one size fits all, right? So like when someone enters a card onto a form field, they're writing 414720. Okay, I've got a BIN. What does it tell me? It tells me it's Chase. It tells me it's US. And it tells me whether I need that zip code or not, which is different than when someone types something else in and I see that's Visa and it's State Bank of India, and I know the authentication requirements are different. So just to tie all that back together, what I would tell you is, you asked why, the minutes matter, because there's over 1,000 different issuing banks in the world, and they all have their own rules. So when I get a Visa card, it's not just a Visa card. It's a Visa card issued by Chase or Wells or Cart Bancaire or Banamex or Bancolombia or the State Bank of India or any of 993 different issuers who all have their own rules and all have to see things formatted a certain way. So now you're just looking at the zip code, and the decision is, do I pass it? Do I pass it in 5+4? Do I not pass it? And then there's 127 different fields.
Okay. So again, because that just kind of blew my mind a little bit. So I had never really thought of it like that. So say I'm running a subscription business and I have 10,000 subscribers, those 10,000 subscribers in theory could have somewhere in the range of 50 to 100. I mean, you mentioned up to 1,000 different issuers, but say I'm just a US based business, could have 50 to 100 different issuing banks, maybe even more than that, with all different permutations, maybe some close together, but also some very, very widely different on what is necessary to submit for a charge to be accepted or authenticated.
That's right. And think about this term of like authentication requirements, right? And now we're talking the issuer level. So US based, we'll just make it US based, right? There's dozens, right? Because there's Chase, there's Wells, there's PNC, Comerica, and you just go down the list. So the issuer matters, and they all have their own rules, right? But then also just think about the other metrics that matter. Well, the other fields that matter, right? The card scheme. Well, is it Visa? Is it Amex? Is it MasterCard? If you're international, is it JCB?
Okay.
Then you get the issuer, right? Is it Wells? Is it Chase? Is it Banamex? Is it Cart Bancaire? Then you get the funding source. Is it credit? Is it debit? Is it prepaid? Then you get the reloadability. If it's prepaid, is it non-reloadable? Is it reloadable? So many people come to me and they're like, oh, it's a prepaid card. Should I accept them? Should I not? It's the wrong question, because I can accept prepaid cards, but I can also check if they're reloadable. So if it's a non-reloadable, like vanilla gift card, of course you shouldn't accept it for a subscription. Why?
Right.
Because a non-reloadable card will go into
It's not going to work.
You know it
Right.
will die. You know that it's not going to take birth. You shouldn't accept that. But have you ever thought about that? Probably not. And so you've got this thing where, like, I can give you the easy India example. And at a company like Microsoft, it literally, like, if you just go back and do that with a big business, you will make millions of dollars. I promise you. You'll make millions of dollars. When I ran that at Microsoft, I ran it across all the subscription services and made close to $100 million just by running it at local time. But if you're the small business, you get to more complexity because all those things matter. So all those factors need to get checked. And so, like, even if you just had a human doing it, hire them in your team, be a consultant, we'll fix a lot of it, but literally the scale of the problem becomes mind-blowing. So we can make it simple and say it's timing and it's metadata, but there's a lot more complexity.
Sure. And so before getting into Butter as a solution, because I mean, I don't want your answer. Basically, I'm saying I don't want your answer to this question to be go use Butter, but we're going to get there. What are some things you've seen from a strategy that that's effective or that brands can do to try to mitigate this, or that are trying to do, whether that's working or not, or things that you've seen that have worked before Butter, say, came to be?
Right. So these little steps that you take, which are little steps that I introduced within these organizations that I worked with, can solve a lot of the problem, right? So if I were to kind of class the world into different methods to solve payment failure, you could think about a few different things. One of those things is just pure back-end optimizations, right? You're looking at dunning. You're looking at optimizing the timing at which you run certain payments. You're looking at creating dynamic rules for different error codes. Give you like simple example. Again, if you want to get a C on the test. So to answer your question really quickly, if you want to get an A on the test, you build a machine learning platform to solve the problem, because literally there is no other solution. I don't like to talk about the ML because the ML doesn't matter. The money matters. Did you make money off of it or did you not? But literally, to solve the problem at this scale, you do need to build an ML platform. Now, if you want to get a C on the test, just make little impacts. One pure kind of bucket is back-end work. Dunning optimization, dynamic decline handling. What do I mean by dynamic decline handling? I mean that almost every organization treats every payment failure the same. What they do is a payment fails Wednesday, January 17th at 1:30 p.m. What do I know is happening? Wednesday, January 21st at 1:30 p.m., we're running a payment again. Wednesday, January 25th at 1:30 p.m., we're running the payment again. Wednesday, January 29th at 1:30 p.m., we're running the payment again. That is what's called the woodpecker. That's what 99% of the market does.
Right.
If you want to do better than the woodpecker. And doing better than the woodpecker and getting an A means a machine learning platform and a solution. But if it's not that, then at least do little things like if you're getting processor error, Stripe is telling you they will not run the payment. But I still see these companies run the card.
And try to run the payment again.
And the 25th and the 29th. Right. And then they're like, why shouldn't I do that? And I'm like, because you're paying every time you swipe. But even if you weren't paying every time you swipe, you're making the health of your merchant ID muddier. What do I mean by that? I mean that you're creating false transactions, which now the banks are seeing as evidence that there are card testers on your platform. But there aren't card testers on your platform. You're just running payments that are never going to go through. When you run those payments that are never going to go through, you make it less likely that I can sign up for the platform, because you should treat this idea of merchant health like a credit score. Your credit score goes down when you slam payment retries. And if you're wondering like why that conceptually makes sense, well, if you think that it has no impact, then why are you not running the card every second after it fails? The reason you're not doing that is because it's going to create negative impacts. So back end, solving the back end is one area that your listeners can really put some time and attention into solving the back end. I will tell you, it's really freaking hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other parts
there's a certain scale that's
coming up front, coming to the authorization flow itself. So now we've been talking downstream. When payments fail, how do we recover them? We should also be talking upstream. When a user signs up for a service, making sure that payment goes through in the first place. And that's one of the things that we talked about when we were talking through the example of needing the zip code field or not needing the zip code field.
Right.
So studying and understanding your card mix on the authorization side is also very, very important. If you can solve the authorization side and you can solve the downstream recovery side, you've done the two things that every subscription company wants and needs you to do from a payments perspective, which is push payments through at the point of sale and recover them when they fail.
So Vijay, I'm curious if you've seen, like, because obviously with Shopify, they're trying to make the checkout process as quick and seamless as possible. Have you seen additional success from an authorization, both upfront and downstream, if somebody's using Shop Pay or Apple Pay versus just collecting regular credit card information?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's two levels to authorization rights. One of them is the user initiated level of, am I going to actually complete this transaction? The other is kind of the back end level. And so from the back end level, which is just like, will the payment get approved or not? Apple Pay, Google Pay, PayPal, they're all card-based methods of payments. They're not going to give you any lift over credit cards per se. Okay. But from the user level, absolutely. If you institute, PayPal and Apple Pay, Google Pay into a checkout form, you make it easy for people to check out, you're going to have positive impacts on your business. So I'm approaching this purely from the algorithmic side. From the algorithmic side, we see the same problem persisting, whether your mix is just cards or Apple, Google Pay otherwise.
Okay. All right. That makes sense then. Okay. So let's get into, because I mean, you've mentioned machine learning, and that's one of the things that I was picking up early on, because it sounds like that Butter is not just figuring out the best methods to process cards across all these different providers, but is actually regularly learning and probably drinking its own Kool-Aid on figuring out what's going to be working better and better on time as things are developed or changing. Am I right in assuming that, or?
Yeah, that's totally right. And, I think part of what we like to do is, I don't like to base the business or the solution anything other than the results. And the reality is every business starts at a different place. You've got some businesses that are using Stripe with Stripe billing to kind of bootstrap. You've got some businesses that are on WorldPay, some that are on Vantif, some that are using Curly or Recharge, some that are using CyberSource and Authnet. Some that have teams that are dedicated to payments, most that have nobody looking at payments or one person who set it up quite a bit of time ago. And what that means is, how everyone's approaching the failed payment problem is different, and you want to meet them where they're at. And so if I'm working with a business, US only, Stripe with Stripe billing, there's different payment failure related issues that they are dealing with, probably largely on the metadata side, versus if I'm dealing with a cross-border international, more archaic stack, where many of the issues I might be dealing with might be around cross-border payments fail. A US-based issuer trying to get payments from a Brazilian-based user, for instance. And so you need a machine learning-based solution, not just because the solution gets better over time, which is true. We learn, right? We start with a global model that is better than what you get out of the box, which you're learning over time, but also literally because the mix of reasons why payments fail is just different for every business. And that means you need a different strategy for every business.
Right. Yeah, we should certainly mention at the top of the show that you're a statistician, right? Like that is one of the ways that you've got started and paying attention to those numbers and understanding some of those changes. So tell me a little bit more then about the approach with Butter then. So are you saying is it a typical SaaS subscription model? Is it a percentage of recovered payments? Like how does it work for anybody who's thinking about whether they'd want to try testing Butter to see what kind of payments you would be able to recover?
Yeah, absolutely. And, two parts to that, I guess, to answer the first part of the question. That's right. I'm not a serial entrepreneur. I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anyone who knows me. Never actually had an ambition to come start a business. But, I saw what I saw and discovered over at Xbox, at DropBox, and at Scribd. And through the various boards of those organizations was eventually actually asked to start this business because it's an area of the business that these organizations hadn't solved. One thing I've learned, if I've learned anything in Silicon Valley in 10 years, if Microsoft hasn't solved it, the rest of Silicon Valley hasn't solved it. It's pretty much a small country over there. So that's kind of what led to the genesis of Butter. And then if you were to work with us, what do we do? Well, what we do is we dive under the hood first. So, I mentioned there's all these different stacks. I don't want to guess. So if I were to guess, right, and you're like, give me your average subscription business, how big do you think this problem is? I can tell you on aggregate, $100 million subscription business will have $10 million in failed payments in the last 12 months. Butter solution will probably be able to give them $5 million back. And we keep 500,000, you'll keep $4.5 million. You say, whoa, that's crazy. If that's true, then we definitely want to work together, because if that's true, I'm netting $4.5 million on 100 million. You're telling me you can give me 4.5 percentage points of ARR growth. And my answer to you is yes, we're telling you we can do that. So if we were really to work together, I'd say that's what we think it will be based on what we've seen from everyone. But we want to see your actual data itself. So we'd ask for your read-only payments keys. We'd go look at your last year, and we would show you exactly how much you lost, because the business is about show and don't tell. So we're spending the time here to tell because people are interested in the problem. I think that's great. I think that's part of the solution, is that we talk to people about the problem. People's minds tend to get blown when they think about how big it is, because if there was broader awareness that the number of failed payments is even above 1%, it would be prioritized the biggest thing in the company. But companies today aren't doing it. But we want to show. So that's our approach, is we would show first. We work with these businesses, public business, $500 million, over $100 million in failed payment volume, giving them more than $50 million back. And that's how we would structure, is if we give you that money back, we take a percentage of it. And the integration is a webhook sitting on top of the major payment service providers. So we're stack independent. Doesn't matter if you're on Stripe or Braintree or Adyen, if you're in-house with subscription management, if you're using Stripe billing, if you're using Recharge. We want to come to you and meet you where you're at and bill you for what we're bringing you. And then if we don't make money for you, we don't exist. So that's the last thing I kind of say to my team, is like, a lot of companies are like, you have to be the best or you won't win. And it's total BS for a lot of companies. You can be pretty bad, but have a good marketing operation and still be a winner. But in our space, you cannot. You have to be the best, because if you didn't make money and somebody else does it better than you, you do die. Because we make money only when our customers make money. So that's how we work.
Right. Absolutely. Cool. So I'm curious too, from a subscription tech stack standpoint, how does your service offering then, would you say, compares to Churn Buster? Because I believe their offering is a little bit more geared at trying to anticipate when card renewal dates are coming up, right? Like that's like one of their core focuses. Would you say that they're doing more than that, or because obviously what you've described is a little bit more involved?
Totally. I would say there's 3 different ways to recover a failed payment if you think about it at a super high level, and we focus on one of the 3. Whereas any holistic solution is focusing partially on all 3 of the 3. So when a payment fails, there's 3 ways for it to get recovered. Number 1 is active recovery. The user takes a step to update their card. Because, for instance, you sent them an email and told them you got to update your card. Or because you sent a customer support person to call them and tell them, hey, you've got to update your card. And you get some portion of recoveries of failed payments via this active recovery step. And that's something that a Churn Buster, for instance, is good for. Because what they do is they trigger, when a payment fails, these emails to go out so that people go update their card information. And they do active generation recovery. So they handle that case. We don't touch that case. In fact, we want you to do what you're doing from a communications perspective. We have ideas, right? We know what best practices are, but whatever you're doing from a comms perspective, we won't touch it. So that's what a Churn Buster would really be involved in doing, is kind of that outreach. The second piece is auto update. There's a functionality within PSPs like Stripe, where if there's an expired card, to use your example, they will go ping the issuer immediately to say, is there a backup card on file here? So we go run Matt's card. It expired December of 2023. We go ping the issuer immediately. Rather than calling Matt and saying, did you update your card? We ping Matt's issuer. We ping Chase Bank on the back end. And we see, oh, he did update his card. And the new date is now going to be May of 2026. And we plug that in, and you never knew. That's auto update. So Stripe offers some of those feature functionality. You've got Churn Buster on the active side. You've got your PSP on the auto updater side. We don't touch any of it. And now when I talked about those big numbers, right, the 100 million and the 10 million in failures, that's the third bucket. And the third bucket is algorithmic recovery. And what we do that's differentiated from a Churn Buster or anyone else in the ecosystem is we are the only solution on the market that doesn't do the woodpecker. The woodpecker is the payment has failed on January 17th at 1:44 p.m. And now we're running it on the 21st. And now we're running it on the 23rd.
We're going to hit it again. We're going to hit it again and again because that's what we're, that's what we want.
So that's and you'll get something out of that. You won't get nothing out of it. You get something out of it. What you will lose, though, is the optimization ability from algorithms that can lead to higher rates of recovery. What you will lose is you pay more to the PSP because you're swiping more. And what you will lose actually in the long run, it's not a topic that we've discussed, and I don't want to overcomplicate it, but it's just that actually in the process of recovering payments more efficiently, you create these positive externalities for yourself. So you can imagine we're paying less to the PSPs because we're using better to do it efficiently, but we're also increasing the transaction authorization rate. And if we're increasing the transaction authorization rate, that actually applies on funnel. And that
Yeah.
means fewer users go into dunning. So in the future, I'm recovering more, fewer users go into dunning, and the users who do get recovered, their LTVs are longer. And you're like, wait, how does that make sense? How can their LTVs be longer? Because if I'm batching my retries like a woodpecker, I'm pushing through some payments that shouldn't have gone through. And so users come back and they're like, I dispute that. Give me a refund.
Right.
And we actually typically tend to see out of the box when you apply this ML strategy that the recoveries we make are not only more, but also fewer payments end up going into dunning down the line. And the recoveries that we make, the LTV is longer because the chargeback rate just got cut in half because you're
Right.
focused on the payments that are configuration errors. So it's this very weird thing where like we're also not pushing through your sleeping zombies. And it makes us
sounds like you're going to put yourself out of business though, Vijay. Like you're just
we're
going to make the
totally
program run
cannibalizing.
more healthy.
We're totally cannibalizing ourselves. And
Right,
I'm
right.
willing to do it because there's just enough opportunity out there to do
Absolutely.
something that works well for the consumer and also makes money. So, there'll be a point in the future where that's going to be a big problem for my VCs, but absolutely are cannibalizing ourselves in this process because it's the right thing to do. Improve the payments health and improve the customer experience.
Absolutely. Well, right. I mean, it sounds like there's still a massive market out there for you guys to get into and try to fix and figure out. And I'm
Absolutely.
sure there's a lot more that can come out of that with all that data that should be. So, Vijay, as a way of wrapping up, just any other ideas or things you'd like to share with the audience around failed payments, retention, anything in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, in summary, if you get nothing out of this, understand a couple of things, right? Failed payments, they're often invisible or underestimated. And then once you realize how big the problem is, it gets really hard to pinpoint the reasons why. And you can just come back and listen to this conversation, right?
Right.
You're going through these epiphanies of like, oh, wait, there's this, there's this, there's this. So now you even get to the point you pinpoint why a payment failed. You've got to develop a strategy to fix it. If you're wrong or overzealous in fixing it, if you swipe too many times, you actually damage yourself. And if you solve for all of it, it's really hard to get there. Everything can change because now, as you may know, regulations may change overnight. PSD2 gets passed in the EU. All of a sudden, everyone needs to run through ES for their transactions. And so you've got to be on top of that too. Right. So it creates this crazy negative feedback cycle that penalizes your business long term. And the perverse part of it is I've worked with some businesses that are in the top 5% of understanding the problem. So they hear the India example that I've heard that before. And this is why we've moved to trying more aggressively to recover payments. And I have to show them that in the process of more aggressively recovering those payments, they've actually created more damage for the overall business. They've lowered the transaction authorization rates and created more users of them. So, personally, I would encourage two things. The first thing is for businesses to really start to look in and dedicate the right resourcing to this problem, because you can get to a C on the test by making some of the changes we talked about today.
Right.
The second thing I would say is, if you realize that you need a professional solution that recognizes the severity of the problem, but also applies nuance to make it better, any point, come have a conversation with us. Our whole business model is around, you can't lose money through an engagement with us because we're starting where you're at. So I think it's worth everyone kind of spending the time as a business to really go in and solve the problem. And the last thing we didn't touch on too much is just the compounding impact of recovering a failed payment, because you didn't just recover the failed payment in January. If you solve that configuration issue from a payment perspective, that user's billing through in February, March, April, et cetera. And so making a 0.5% move to your churn rate in a given month has this compounding impact over the course of the business that absolutely is worth diving into. So hopefully the world of payments, which seems super dry up front, actually becomes a really, really interesting world when you dive.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the most important one, right? Because that's what's allowing us to get paid or not. And I really appreciate how you explained the three different buckets of the different types of failed payments and payment recovery. I mean, I got to say, I coming into this, I did not expect to be this much educated, but I actually feel like you've started to fill in a hole that I didn't realize was there in my understanding of this, the different aspects of this. So I'm really, really appreciative of Vijay for you coming on here. For anybody that's interested, I would highly recommend you go check out butterpayments.com. Vijay, you can find on LinkedIn. Is there anything else about ways that people can reach out to you or your team, Vijay, that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so butterpayments.com, you can come through an inbound form. My email personally is just my first name at butterpayments.com if anyone has any questions or issues around this. And like I said, we're kind of built to try and solve this for any organization. So you're thinking through ideation around it. We're here to help. And to your point, Matt, you're like, hey, I'm learning some new things today. And 10 years ago, this whole thing was completely new to me. And I don't blame anyone for it being new to them either. You don't sign up to go work at the big tech companies of the world because you're really excited about how the payments architecture works, right? Core product teams aren't like, yeah, I really want to own payments in-house. Because I ran like search and recommendations teams. You know what happens when you try and outsource it? There's bloody elbows because you're like, I want to own Netflix recommendations. Nobody wants to own the payments. So I don't blame anyone for that, but hopefully it's an interesting kind of area and a focus area that folks will start to become more aware about. And we create, a better user experience for everyone and make some money along the way.
Absolutely. Well, and honestly, that's one of the places I start when I'm doing my consults and investigations into brands, is starting to look at like just failure codes as well as like looking at payments, because most brands aren't paying attention to those. They're just looking at aggregate numbers of acquiring and churn subscribers. And they're viewing it like, maybe they're collecting cancellation reasons, but they're not listening to error codes that the subscription app is returning, right? Inventory being out. And then also payments. Sometimes they'll have a churn buster in place. It just depends on the size of the brand, but that's usually it, right? That's usually it is a little bit of active recovery and not the involuntary churn.
And even the 5% that are looking at the error codes and doing their best, right? Putting their hat on to go look at it, they're looking at an aggregation. So I'm in a Stripe dashboard or a Churn Buster dashboard, and I see this error code says generic failure, right? And first of all, the answer is, what do I do about that? But the second thing is, to our point earlier, there's 1,000 different issuers. So all of the raw acquirer responses are being rolled up and thrown under the umbrella of this big catch-all.
It's not going to be one single thing.
If I'm smart enough to be like, I know my biggest error code is processor failure or generic decline. I can tell you there's 10 sub-levels under that you're not looking at. That's what our system's looking at too. So that's where it gets complex. And I could honestly give you another hour on that, but we're gonna save people's ears and time all the time.
Absolutely. This has been incredibly informative. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I'll put some links to their site and Vijay's email in the show notes as well. And please, for anyone listening, that's it for this dose. Please join us next week for another episode of Subscription Prescription. That's it for today. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe so that you can get notified when new episodes come out each week on Tuesdays.